She had given him every quiet, carefully kept part of herself, and he had filed all of it under nothing, in a sentence he didn't know she could hear. The afternoon Adria found the mittens, she wasn't looking for them. She'd gone to the craft fair on Atlantic Avenue for a jar of local honey and a reason to be outside, and she ended up at a small folding table near the back of the park where an elderly woman sat knitting without looking at her hands. The mittens were in a basket by the table leg, gray, hand-knit, with tiny white stars stitched along the cuffs. They were barely bigger than Adria's closed fist. She picked them up and couldn't put them down. The woman at the table smiled the way people smile when they've understood something without being asked. "First?" she said. Adria said yes before she'd fully decided how she felt about it. She wrapped the mittens in tissue paper and tucked them into the front pocket of her jacket. She stood on the sidewalk outside the fair for a few minutes and let herself feel it. The real thing, not the managed version she'd been keeping herself to for the past 3 weeks. She was going to be someone's mother. The idea arrived in her body the way true things do, quietly, with weight. Then she flagged a cab to Holden's townhouse on West 82nd Street, and everything she thought was about to happen walked out the door without her. She'd been with Holden Ashby for 5 months, privately, carefully, in the way that things between two people exist before they've been named in front of other people. That was how he kept things, close, unremarked on, away from the particular machinery of his family and his name. She'd understood that from the beginning. The Ashby name in New York real estate was the kind of name that preceded the person. She knew what she was getting into, or thought she did. What she hadn't expected was how much of him turned out to be real. She'd prepared herself for someone who was warm only in performance, impressive in rooms, engineered for effect. He was that sometimes. She'd watched him at industry dinners, working the handshakes, reading each person in the room within 30 seconds of arrival. He was absolutely that man when it was required. But alone with her, he was someone else entirely. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He noticed when she was tired before she mentioned it. He remembered 3 weeks after she told him that her mother's garden grew better after she stopped trying to plan it, and he connected that observation to something else entirely in a conversation they had later. And she'd thought, this is who he is. This is the actual person. She loved him. She'd watched the feeling accumulate the way sediment does. Slow, incremental, until one day you look and there's something solid where there wasn't before. He'd texted that morning after her message. Come whenever. Family dinner until 8. Use the lobby door. She had a code for the lobby. That was how their relationship existed, through secondary access, through the parts of his life that weren't the front-facing version. She told herself it was temporary. Tonight she'd tell him, and things would reorganize themselves into something that finally made sense. She took the wrong turn in the hallway. She'd been distracted. Her hands were cold. Her heart was doing something irregular. She kept pressing her palm against the pocket with the mittens to make sure they were still there. She turned left instead of right and ended up in the narrow corridor that ran alongside the formal dining room, and the door at the end of it was not fully closed. She heard his voice first, that register he used with family, measured, slightly elevated, performing ease. She couldn't make out words yet. She started to turn back. Then she heard her own name. It was his father's voice, smooth and rhetorical, the voice of a man who had spent decades asking questions that were actually statements. He said, "Adria, the way you say the name of something minor and inconvenient." And Holden answered. She didn't move. Something in her body simply refused the instruction to leave. "Adria?" He repeated her name with a short, dismissive sound. "She runs a coffee shop in Brooklyn, Dad. She's nobody, a temporary thing. She'll be gone before summer." Someone at the table said something she couldn't make out. Holden said something else, his tone easy, assured, not cruel in the way of someone enjoying cruelty, but indifferent in the way of someone who doesn't know the difference. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Her other hand went flat against the jacket pocket, against the mittens, against the tissue paper wrapped around two small gray things she'd been carrying toward him. She stood in that corridor for what was probably 40 seconds and felt like a geological era. Then she walked out. She walked back through the lobby, out through the main entrance, because she was no longer interested in secondary access, and onto West 82nd Street. The city was doing what October cities do, flooding the sidewalks, indifferent, moving without regard for the specific devastation of one person inside it. She stood on the curb and breathed the cold air and thought, I was coming to tell him something. She still had the mittens. They were still in her pocket. She didn't look at them. She took a cab home to Brooklyn and sat on the edge of her bathtub for a long time without turning on the light. At some point, the mittens came out of her jacket, and she set them on the back of the sink, gray in the dark, small enough to hold in one hand. She pulled out her laptop and bought a bus ticket to Asheville, North Carolina, her mother's house, the green smell of it, the particular mountain quiet she'd spent her 20s trying to outgrow. She left at 5 in the morning. She didn't leave a note. She packed her coffee grinder, her good knife, enough clothes for a week that became 2 months, that became the rest of the pregnancy. She did not answer Holden's calls. They started on day 4, tentative at first, the rhythm of someone who isn't sure what they're apologizing for yet. Then more frequent. Then, after about 3 weeks, they stopped. She told herself the silence was what she wanted. Most days, she almost believed it. Her mother, Dottie, was 67 years old and ran a garden supply shop off Merrimon Avenue. She had raised Adria alone after Adria's father left when she was 6, and she had the specific competence of a woman who has learned to absorb hard information without making it about her reaction. She opened the door at 6 in the morning when Adria arrived with a duffel bag and a face that told the whole story without a sentence. She said, I made biscuits. She poured coffee. She sat across the kitchen table and waited. When Adria finally said, I'm pregnant, Mom, Dottie set down her mug with deliberate care. Then she said, Tell me about him. What followed was not ease and not healing. It was the ordinary forward motion of days. Adria helped at the shop in the mornings. She began photographing things around the house, not for any project, just to have something to do with her eyes. The backyard, the fog along the creek at sunrise. A ceramic mug her mother had been using for 20 years, its glaze worn smooth at the rim. She told her mother about the hallway. She didn't tell her about the mittens. Some things you keep because the moment you translate them into words, they become slightly less true. What she didn't know was that 500 miles north, in a Manhattan townhouse on West 82nd Street, Holden Ashby was walking through every room of what he'd said. His housekeeper told him one morning over coffee in the kitchen that she'd seen a woman in the corridor outside the dining room the evening of the family dinner, standing very still, dark jacket, hand pressed flat against her pocket. Holden asked her to describe the jacket. She described it. He went to his office and sat in his chair and did not move for a very long time. He called his assistant Trace. In 2 days, Trace had a name, an address in Brooklyn, a mother's name from a story Adria had told him once about growing up with mountains outside every window. He told Trace, don't approach her. He didn't explain further. Trace didn't ask. What Trace found 48 hours later was a prenatal clinic appointment, 7 weeks along, 4 days before the family dinner. First consultation. Holden sat with the phone in his hand for a long time after Trace finished talking. She had been coming to tell him. He flew to Asheville the next morning on a commercial flight. He booked a room at a small hotel on Lexington Avenue under a name that wasn't his, not to deceive anyone, but because the Ashby name would have announced itself, and he was not arriving as an announcement. He was arriving as himself, which was something he'd spent the past month understanding were not always the same thing. He didn't go to the house that day. He drove past it once and saw the white cottage with the green door and a light on in the kitchen window, warm against the November gray, and he kept driving. He knocked on the door the next morning at 9. Dottie answered. She looked at him with the particular assessment of a woman who has been expecting exactly this. She's walking, Dottie said. The trail along the creek, about a mile from here. She usually turns around at the old mill bridge. He held her gaze. You're telling me where to find her? I am, Dottie said. Why? Dottie looked at him for a moment. Because she still has the mittens, she said. It landed on him in a way he didn't yet have the context to fully understand. Don't push her. She's not obligated to receive anything you've decided to offer. He found Adria on the far side of the trail, standing at the bridge railing, watching the water move over the flat rocks below. She had her hands in her jacket pockets, same jacket. He sat down on the low wooden railing about 10 feet from where she stood and did not try to close the distance. She didn't turn around. I knew you were there at the tree line, she said. I know you did. The creek moved. A cold November morning, the mountains visible over the tree line. She finally turned and looked at him. He held the eye contact and did not perform anything with his face. He let her look at whatever she needed to see. You came alone, she said. Yes. Why? Because you were in that hallway, he said, and you didn't say a word, and you left. And I need you to know that I know exactly what you heard and what you were carrying when you heard it. Something moved through her expression, deep and quick, like current under still water. Then it settled. She looked back at the creek. Knowing it doesn't undo it, she said. I'm not here because I think it does. She turned and looked at him again. Her jaw was set, her eyes were dry. This was not a woman who had come here to be seen falling apart. You said I was nobody, she said. You said I was temporary. To your father. In that voice you use when something doesn't require your full attention. He said nothing. And I had. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. It doesn't matter what I had. I had something in my pocket that I was bringing to you, and I stood in that hallway and I heard you explain to your family that I was the kind of thing that gets sorted out by summer. Adria, his voice was quiet. Don't use my name like that right now. She said it evenly, without heat, but without give. I'm not telling you this for an apology. I'm telling you because you said you came here so I'd know you understand. So now you understand what it looked like from where I was standing. You understand what I was holding and what I did with both of those things. She turned and walked. He let her. He extended his hotel reservation by 2 weeks and said nothing to Adria about it. He found the rhythms of her life in Asheville, the coffee shop she went to on Tuesdays, the trail she preferred in the morning, the way she moved through town with the particular self-sufficiency of someone who has learned not to need anything she can't carry herself. He held all of it carefully, the way you carry something lit. He did not follow her. He ran along the creek each morning at times that didn't overlap with hers. He worked remotely from the hotel room. He told himself that proximity was the only honest thing he could offer at this stage. He was wrong about which direction the next threat would come from. He found out on a Monday evening when Trace called to tell him Holden's mother Lenore had made a call. A family attorney had visited Dottie's garden shop that afternoon with a polite offer in a sealed envelope and a suggestion, smooth, well-dressed, delivered in the tone of someone doing a favor, that Adria consider raising the child quietly, privately, with the benefit of substantial financial support and the understanding that the Ashby name was better kept at a comfortable distance from the situation. Dottie had listened to the entire thing from behind the counter. When the man finished, she'd looked at the envelope and then at his face and said, "You can tell Lenore Ashby that my daughter knows the difference between generosity and a threat. I'd suggest she learn it too." Then she'd gone back to her seedling inventory. Adria had been in the back room. She'd heard every word. She called Holden. He answered on the first ring. "She sent someone to your mother's shop," Adria said. Her voice was the temperature of creek water in November. "Your family sent a man with a check and a message that said disappear quietly." He was already reaching for his keys. "I want you to know what that felt like," she said, "standing in the back of my mother's shop, hearing someone put a number on what I should be worth in exchange for going away. I know. Do you? Because understanding it and doing something about it are two different things. and I need to know right now which one you're actually capable of." He was in the car. He drove to the house in 9 minutes. He knocked. Dottie opened the door and stepped aside without a word. Adria was at the kitchen table, hands flat on the wood, looking at a fixed point that was not anything in the room. He sat down across from her. He called his mother. He did it there, in Dottie's kitchen, with Adria watching, the afternoon light coming through the window, the sound of the neighbor's dog somewhere outside. Lenore answered on the second ring. He didn't modulate his voice or manage the conversation the way he usually did with his family. He said, "You sent someone to Adria's mother's shop today." His mother said nothing. "You sent a man with an envelope and a suggestion that she handle this quietly." Still nothing. "Adria and her daughter are under my protection. That is not a position I'm taking. It's a fact you need to absorb right now before any other decisions get made." He paused. "If anyone from this family contacts her again, directly, indirectly, through an attorney or a personal friend or any other mechanism, they will be dealing with me. Personally. Are we clear?" His mother said quietly, "You're choosing her over your family." He looked at Adria across the table. Adria looked back. Her expression was complicated. It was not yet trust, but it was something in the direction of trust, which was more than he'd had yesterday. "I'm choosing to stop repeating the mistake I already made once," he said. He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. The kitchen was very quiet. "Okay," Adria said. Just that. He understood without needing it explained that okay from Adria was not a small word. She hadn't given it cheaply in all the months he'd known her. He nodded and didn't push further. But it wasn't finished. 8 days later, Trace called at 7 in the morning. The call had a texture to it before a word was spoken. Holden sat up in bed. "There's an article," Trace said. "It went up 2 hours ago. Entertainment column that covers money-adjacent gossip. It has her name." The floor seemed to shift slightly. "Full name," Trace continued. "The cafe, the pregnancy, Asheville," and a quote, attributed to an Ashby family source, saying that Adria had pursued the relationship deliberately with awareness of the Ashby family's financial position, and that the pregnancy may have been a calculated decision. Holden was standing before he knew he'd stood. She found it before he called. He could hear it in the single breath she took when she answered. The specific sound of someone who has already processed the first wave and is now sitting inside the wreckage. "My name is on the internet," she said, with a quote saying, "I planned to get pregnant to trap you." A pause that had no floor to it. "My cafe employees are texting me. My college roommate sent me a screenshot. Someone found my mother's shop number. I'm going to get it taken down." "It's already been up for 2 hours, Holden. 2 hours. "I know. Who did this? I'm going to find out. I need to know right now that you're going to find out and then actually do something, not manage it from a distance. You have my word." He had the article removed within 3 hours. The publisher took one call. The Ashby name, even separated from the family business, carried enough weight in enough rooms. He forwarded the confirmation to Adria. She sent back 4 words, "Thank you. Find out who." It was Paxton, his younger brother, 29, who'd been 3 seats down the table at the family dinner in October, who had the specific gift of being invisible in rooms where larger personalities operated, who had, Trace determined, placed the call to the columnist 11 days earlier, not in reaction to anything Holden had done, but as a plan already in motion. Preemptive. He had decided Adria was a variable that needed removing before it became a problem. Holden flew to Connecticut. The family house in Ridgefield was lit in the early evening. Paxton's car in the drive. Holden knocked, and Paxton opened the door, holding a drink and wearing the expression of someone who has been waiting to find out how something lands. "I know about the call," Holden said. Paxton's composure held for about 4 seconds. "Then I was protecting the family." "You called a gossip column," Holden said, "with her name, and a fabricated quote about her character. She's 29 years old and she's carrying my daughter alone in a city where she knows nobody but her mother, and you decided the thing to do was put her name in a public forum attached to a lie about who she is. I implied. You told a journalist she got pregnant on purpose to trap me. His voice was level, completely level. He had made a decision before he got out of the car that he was not going to raise it. You didn't think about the women from her past who would read it and text her. You didn't think about the strangers who would find her cafe's phone number. You thought about the family narrative, and you used her as a tool to protect it. Paxton set his glass down on the foyer table, his jaw tightened. You were going to throw everything away for someone you'd known for 5 months. I threw things away because of who I was for 35 years, Holden said. Not because of her. He looked at his brother, really looked, the way you look at someone you've shared your whole life with when you're standing on the far side of something irreversible. You decided she was a problem to solve. You didn't see her as a person, and I know where you learned to do that. I taught it to you, by example. He paused. So I understand how you got here, and I'm telling you it was wrong. Not strategically. It was wrong because she is a person, and she's going to be the mother of my daughter for the rest of my life. And what you did today cannot be fully undone. Paxton said nothing. You and I don't speak about Adria or my daughter again. Holden said, until you can do it with the understanding that she is not a situation. She's not a variable. She's someone I failed, and I intend to spend whatever it takes being worth the effort of her deciding whether that failure is the whole story. He left. He called Adria from the highway. It was Paxton, he said. My brother. He placed the call 11 days ago. The quote was fabricated. A pause. I talked to him. Silence on her end. My mother knew what he'd done, he said, and didn't ask him to stop it. More silence. Then quietly, what does that mean for you? It means I'm done trying to manage this from inside the family structure. He watched the highway lights overhead in the dark. I'm going to go in tomorrow and formally separate my stake in the family firm. Make it legal. Make it so they can't use the business as leverage against us. He paused. And I'm going to make it clear, in writing, with a family attorney present, that any action taken against you or our daughter by anyone with the Ashby name is an action taken against me personally. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful in a way he'd come to recognize. The sound of someone deciding how much to hand over. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Not for me. I know you're not asking. I'm deciding. He took a breath. There's a difference between understanding something and actually doing it. You asked me which one I was capable of. This is the doing part. The meeting was at 9 the next morning in the Ashby family firm's conference room in Midtown. Holden arrived with his personal attorney. His father, his mother, and Paxton arrived together, which told him that whatever came next had been discussed. He set the documents on the table. He walked through them without preamble, his equity stake, separated into an independent holding company with no legal ties to Ashby Development. The formal declaration of personal protection for Adria and the child. His mother's face did not change. His father's did, slightly, a single degree of something that was not quite recognition, but was adjacent to it. You're doing this for a woman who hasn't forgiven you, his father said. I'm doing it because it's right, Holden said, and because she deserves to have someone in her corner who didn't put conditions on it. His father looked at him for a long moment. She must matter, he said finally. Not a challenge, something quieter. She does. He flew back to Asheville that afternoon. He walked into Dottie's house at 7 in the evening. Dottie was at the stove. Adria was on the couch, with her legs up, a book face down on her stomach, and she looked up when he came through the door with the expression she had when she was deciding how to feel about something. It's done, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Come sit down, she said. Tell me what he said. He told her. All of it. His father's face. His mother's silence. The way Paxton had looked at him on his way out of the conference room. Not with contempt, but with something closer to genuine confusion. The confusion of someone watching a person they thought they understood do something that doesn't fit the model. Adria listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I need time. I know. I'm not saying no to anything. I'm saying I need time to tell the difference between what's actually happening and what I want to be happening. Those two things are not always easy to separate right now. She pressed her hand against her side, the slight gesture of someone recalibrating around the physical fact of what she was carrying. I want to think clearly. Adria, he looked at her. I'm not here to make you decide anything. I'm just here. She looked at him for another long moment. You can have the spare room, she said, at the end of the hall. Mom already put sheets on it. He looked at her. She was optimistic. Something shifted in Adria's expression, not quite a smile, the space just before one. She's always been a better judge of character than I give her credit for, Adria said. He moved into the room at the end of the hall. It smelled like cedar and old cotton and the particular mountain-dry air that came through the window at night. He set his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his palms to his knees and breathed. He learned where things went in Dottie's house. He got up before 6 and had coffee started before Adria came downstairs. He drove to appointments without making it a gesture, just drove. He learned that her back hurt on the right side at 32 weeks and that the heating pad was in the hall closet on the second shelf. He did not make himself the center of any of it. He had been warned against this by Adria, by Dottie, by some animal instinct he'd developed over months of watching what she actually needed versus what men like him typically offered. The baby came at 35 weeks on a Tuesday morning at 4 a.m. He heard Adria's door, heard her moving with intention, was in the hallway before he'd processed why. She was at the top of the stairs, one hand against the wall, breathing carefully. It started, she said. It's early, I know. I'll get the bag. He got the bag. He woke Dottie. They drove to Mission Hospital through the dark mountain streets. The labor was long, and it was hard, and it was hers. He understood that, fully, in a way he hadn't before it was happening in front of him. He was there, and he was useful when being useful was possible and present when it wasn't. He didn't perform anything. Around 3 in the morning, she reached for his hand. She gripped it without looking at him, and he held on, and she worked through something, and then the grip loosened. She didn't let go after. He didn't mention it. At 6:42 in the morning, his daughter was born. She was 5 pounds 14 ounces. She cried immediately, emphatically, the way certain people announce themselves from the very first moment, with full commitment and no apology. They put her on Adria's chest. Adria made a sound he had never heard from her in all the months he'd known her, not in the early good months, not in the hard ones. A sound of total unmanaged truth. Love and exhaustion and overwhelm, all expressed at once, in a single breath. He cut the cord. The nurse asked, and he looked at Adria, and Adria looked back at him with her face entirely open. Every careful layer gone, just her underneath, just what was actually there, and she nodded. Then they placed his daughter in his arms. She was so small. He had known the data of it, and the data had not prepared him for the specific, irreducible weight of a person who had just arrived and was still working out the fact of arrival. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. She was simply being with total, serious attention. He was crying. He registered it distantly, the way you register something that's happening outside of any decision you made. He looked up, and Adria was watching him hold their daughter, with an expression that was not yet forgiveness, and not yet the thing they'd had before, but was the ground where both of those things could eventually stand. He looked at her. He didn't say he was sorry. He'd said it, and it hadn't been enough, and this moment was not the moment for what had been insufficient. He didn't say he loved her, because he hadn't earned the full weight of that word back yet. He looked at his daughter and then at Adria and said, "She has your mouth." And Adria, who had walked out of a hallway in October, carrying gray mittens and a secret, who had built 5 months of a life in a mountain city without him, who had held every difficult thing with both hands and not let a single one break her. Adria looked at her daughter in his arms and said quietly, "I know." The word landed the way true words land when they carry more than they appear to. Everything around the literal thing, All the weight and distance and earned ground of what two people have traveled to arrive at a single ordinary moment. They named her Flo, not short for anything, just Flo. Adria decided it on the second day, half asleep with the baby on her chest, and she said it once, and it was simply correct, the way certain things are correct, without requiring explanation. April became May, May became summer. Flo grew with determined efficiency, as though she had decided to make up for the early arrival through sheer velocity of development. Holden learned what she needed before she cried for it. Adria watched this happen and said nothing about it. She was in her own process. Postpartum was not gentle, and she didn't pretend otherwise. There was a night in the 5th week when she sat on the couch after Flo was asleep and cried the way you cry when you're too tired to hold it anymore. Holden came downstairs for water, found her, sat down at the far end of the couch, and stayed there. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer solutions. After a while, she said, "I used to imagine how I'd tell you. I had a whole version of it. You were surprised and then happy. We were in your kitchen somehow. I don't know why I always pictured your kitchen." "The espresso machine," he said. "It takes up a lot of space." She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. It was a good version. In my head. She looked at her hands. "I know the real version couldn't have been that, but sometimes I'm still sad about the version I imagined." "Even now," he said. She looked at him. "Even now," she said, "when the real version is, when it's better than I thought it was going to be. Back in January when I thought it wasn't going to be anything." A pause. "I'm still sad about the kitchen version." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry you lost it. I know that was something." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's why it helps," she said, "that you know it was something." In September, Holden's brother Paxton drove down from Connecticut without calling first. He knocked on the door on a Saturday morning. Adria answered. She stood in the doorway and looked at him, this man who had put her name in a public forum attached to a fabricated lie, and didn't make it easy for him. He didn't ask her to. "I owe you something I don't know how to make adequate," he said. "I'm going to try anyway." Holden stayed in the kitchen. He heard the rhythm of the conversation from a distance. Confrontation, then explanation, then something quieter. When Paxton appeared in the kitchen doorway 40 minutes later, his face had the look of someone who has said difficult, true things and has not been forgiven for them and knows he doesn't deserve to be. He looked at Flo, asleep in the bouncy seat on the counter. Something happened in his face. The kind of thing babies do to people who think they've got everything organized, cut straight through it. Adria didn't invite him to hold her. She stood near the counter and watched him look at his niece for a long time. Then she went to make coffee, which was its own kind of answer. Not forgiveness, not the closing of a door, just the statement that she could be in the same room as this, and that was where things were. October, 1 year. Adria didn't say anything about the date. She woke up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Flo in her lap, and she was quiet in a way that was different from her usual morning quiet. The garden outside was going into its fall colors. The same garden she'd looked at from this kitchen her whole childhood. Holden noticed. He always noticed now. He sat down across from her with his coffee. He didn't ask. "I bought the mittens a year ago," she said. "Yesterday was exactly a year." She looked at Flo. "I keep thinking about who I was that day." On the sidewalk outside the fair, 4 minutes of being purely straightforwardly happy. A brief sound, not quite a laugh. She had no idea what was about to happen. "Neither did I," he said. She looked at him. "I had no idea what it was going to take to become." He stopped. "I didn't know what I was yet. I thought I did. I was wrong." She looked at him across the table. "Do you know now?" "Better than before," he said, "which I think is what actually knowing yourself looks like. Not finished, just better than before." She looked at her coffee, then she looked back at him. "Ask me," she said. He went still. "What you said in the car, after Connecticut, before you flew back here the first time." She held his gaze. "Ask me now." He set down his mug. "Do you love me?" She looked at Flo in her lap. She looked at the mittens on the kitchen windowsill, where she'd moved them from the drawer 3 days ago and hadn't said anything about it, and neither had he. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He didn't make a speech. He picked up his coffee. He looked at her. "Okay," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "That's all you have to say?" "What else is there?" Something happened in her face. Not the almost smile she'd been giving him since January, not the space just before 1. The actual thing, open and real and entirely, irrevocably hers. He had walked away from a great deal to be sitting at this kitchen table. It turned out that was exactly the right amount to walk away from. Flo made a sound in her lap. Adria looked down and smoothed one hand over the baby's back and said, Okay, I hear you," in the voice she only used with Flo, soft and unhurried and slightly undone. Holden looked at the two of them. He looked at the mittens on the windowsill, gray with the white stars on the cuffs, moved out of the drawer at last and into the light. He thought about an afternoon in October on Atlantic Avenue when a woman had stood on a sidewalk for 4 minutes being purely happy, and what it had cost her to get back to that, the long, specific, unspectacular work of it, inch by earned inch. He got up and started making breakfast. Dottie came downstairs 10 minutes later and said nothing about the fact that he was there and that the coffee was already made and that something in the room felt different from yesterday. She just poured herself a cup and sat down at the table. That was enough. That was, it turned out, exactly enough.